Welcome to the 17th episode of Redeeming the Time. I am your host, Jake Wells. This is my dad, my co-host, Keith Wells, and thank you for joining us for yet another episode. And today is going to be fun. We've got 2 Kings, the bulk of 2 Kings. We got 4 through 22, and I'm looking forward to this one.
What'd you call it?
Huh?
What did you call this?
The Gauntlet of Kings?
The Gauntlet of Kings, yeah. So buckle in for a lot of different names, and we'll try to help decipher this, make it a little easier, at least give the roadmap for some of these chapters.
There's a lot that happens.
Yeah, we got a lot to go through today, so we'll make it a short subject prior.
Speaking of kings and nations and stuff.
There you go. That's a good segue.
Lord of the Rings. So we talked about Star Wars last week. Lord of the Rings. Which one is your favorite? What scenes stick out to you when you think about Lord of the Rings?
Not The Hobbit. That I did not like how they cut that up. That was
one book
they took,
into 3 movies.
Yeah, they took what should have been 2 movies and made it into 3. Mine would be the very first one, The Fellowship of the Rings. They introduce all the characters. It's a lot of fun. And then,
who's your favorite character?
Oh wow,
I
don't even.
I love Legolas. There's a scene where
Legolas is cool. Yeah,
he's sliding down something.
Yeah.
You know what I'm talking about? He shoots, takes it out, and then.
Him or the what is he called?
Gimli.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Those two, their interaction is great.
They're the comedic relief for sure.
Yeah, when they're in the final one where they're counting how many of the people they take out.
That's the scene,
competition.
The one,
that's good stuff.
I like the third one just because of all the battles and.
Yeah, the second one just sort of like, hey, we're going to commercial break, and we'll come back in 2 years. I mean, it was just like just stops. Was
it 2 years? I thought it was back to.
Who knows?
Whatever.
It might have been just been a year, but that's the worst abrupt ending of a movie I've ever seen in my life.
Worse
actually.
than Solo.
Yeah.
No, Solo
was in the middle.
In the middle.
Yeah. Nobody knows what we're talking about here, but
what in the world just happened? Or now we're in this scene.
All right. So that would be what I would say.
So comment your favorite Lord of the Rings character, movie, scene, all that jazz, and we're nerds.
Yeah.
Star Wars, Lord of the Rings. What's next? Marvel. Have we already talked about Marvel?
I don't know. That guy who plays Smeagol, he's
Andy Serkis.
Yeah, I mean he did King Kong. He's been in Marvel movies, and now he's done the entire what is that? The eight movies. Planet of the Apes movies. Yeah. So.
All right. Now let's get into something.
Yeah, let's get into the Word of God.
About.
So
we got Monday, chapters 4 and 5 is Monday.
Okay.
And we have the miracles of Elisha here in this chapter.
Yeah, so 2 chapters before chapter 2, we had the transfer from the great prophet Elijah, and now it's the prophet Elisha. Chapter 3 was that whole thing where he was with the kings in the desert, and now we get to just sort of a laundry list of some miracles that he did here.
4 to 5 of them.
Yeah, so we start off the chapter. There's a widow that's in debt. They're going to sell her sons into bond servanthood. So he tells her to gather a bunch of pots, as many pots as you can, and then they close the door, and she pours what little oil she has. It just keeps pouring and pouring and pouring, and then she goes to sell the oil. The interesting thing here is when she goes in, they close the door behind her. So there's no more getting pots. So this was a sort of a measure of her faith. You know, she could have got 2 or 3, or she could have got every pot she could ever find. And either way, once that door was closed, that was it. There wasn't any going back. And some ways, if you think of this in our life, our blessings are proportional to our faith. You pray. It reminds me of the old story where I've heard many pastors tell the story. About faith, where a group of people went to pray for rain, but only one of them brought an umbrella. That kind of mentality. Also, oil is synonymous with the Holy Spirit and the Word of God, which is never extinguished, but is always willing to fill an empty vessel. There's a good preaching point there as well. Next, we get into the Shunammite woman.
The Shunammite woman, he tells her that she will bear a child, and she bears the child, but then the child dies.
Yeah, so it's like apparently the route that he took, this Shunammite lady lived, Shunem must have been right in the middle of that area, so she had made a place for him to where he could stay there.
Yeah.
And in reward for that, he says, "What can I give you?" And she's an older lady, apparently had never had any kids, so he gives her, he says, "By this time next year, you and your husband, you're going to have a kid." And sure enough, not just a kid, but a son, which would carry on the name.
And then the kid dies, though.
Yeah.
And so Elijah then performs another miracle, and he resurrects the child.
Yeah, so he revives the child. And there's a lot that could go in there, but you can read that.
Then you got the poisonous pottage here, and he purifies a pot of stew.
Yeah, so there was a famine going on, so I guess they collected whatever they could. They boil the stuff, and there's
nasty stuff.
Death in the pot, they say. That's a pretty cool term. And
then
he fixes it.
And then he feeds 100 guys with 20 loaves of bread.
Yeah, and there's enough left over for 100 prophets to eat. God can do what he needs to despite what we have. You had an interesting thing.
So the thing that I kept thinking about is, which I've heard mentioned before, but the connection between Elijah and Elisha and John the Baptist and Jesus.
Yeah, I've never heard it that way. I've heard obviously Elijah and John the Baptist, because Jesus makes that comparison. He came in the spirit of Elijah,
and the people thought it might have been Elijah.
Right. So he is the herald of the king that's coming. Other than some of the similarities with Elisha's miracles, this feeding of the people, like Jesus' feeding of the 5,000, raising from the dead, different things. I've never really heard that put toward Elisha. Something interesting I'd never considered, something worth studying.
Yeah, it's just Elijah came before, just like John the Baptist came before.
Without a doubt.
Chapter 5, we got Naaman.
This is the coolest chapter. To me, this one is a chapter on the nature of man. We've got this guy. He's the captain for the Syrian army. They had taken some captives, and one of them's this little servant girl. And this Jewish servant girl, he has leprosy, and he's the captain. So what's he going to do here? And she tells about a prophet of God in their land. So the Syrian king hears about it and sends Naaman to the king, and the king of Israel, and he's like, he's just trying to, I can't cure leprosy.
Am I God to do this?
You're just trying to pull me into this thing. And Elisha hears about it, and he steps in, and he sends his servant Gehazi to go tell him, all right, here's what I want you to do. He doesn't go meet him. He just says, he sends his servant. This is top of the line guy in his country. He's used to being treated with great care and respect. And Elisha says, "Go dip yourself in the Jordan River 7 times, and you'll be healed." Well, he doesn't take that well, and his pride, his expectations. He's expecting to have to pay something, or some grand prayer, or some religious type ceremony, or something like that, or at least be acknowledged.
Some big grand gesture. Yeah.
And it's just as simple as washing in this dirty river. And the Jordan River's dirty. I mean, it's just dirty as far as mud. I mean, it seemed beneath him. But then, as you and I were talking before, his servant steps in.
Yeah.
And
he urges him to, if he will probably wouldn't have done it.
Yeah, he had a wise servant for sure.
Yeah. And
so
he so he does it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So he says, you know, if he would have asked you to do something grand, would you have done it? Yeah, I would have done it. He's like, all right. So he goes and he washes 7 times. And, you know, if you're teaching this with kids or, you know, the first time, nothing, second time, you know, you can build it up and have some fun with it.
Times.
And then the 7th time it says that he came out and his skin was as a new child. Now, if you can just read this and go on, but this one is just ripe as a picture of our salvation. An incurable nature. He has leprosy. We have sin. Hears of God from a servant of God. He hears the word of God. He asks to have faith and to humble himself versus doing some work, like a religious work or something like that. He's told to do something that anyone could do. It's unlimited. It's not limited to just the upper elite. And then once he dips, his flesh came like a child, like a little child. He is reborn.
Mm-hmm.
I love it. That's just good stuff. And then afterwards, actually, we see too his nature has changed because he comes back to Elisha and he wants to give him some payment. And Elisha says, no, this isn't, this isn't for sale. And he says, when I go back, my king is going to want to make me go into his temple with him to his pagan god. I have to do this, but I'm not worshiping that pagan god. And he tells him to go in peace. And then we have Gehazi.
Gehazi's greed, yeah. So he sees the opportunity that he thinks that Elisha missed, and so he goes and he lies to Naaman and say that Elisha does want the clothes for 2 guys coming.
Yeah.
And so Naaman obviously obliges, not knowing better, and he gets clothes and some riches and stuff from Naaman, the gift that he was going to...
Part of it, at least,
yeah. Part of it. But then when he comes back, Elisha already knows.
Yeah.
He's like, where'd you go? And...
I didn't go anywhere.
He cuts right to the chase. He's right when he comes in. And I didn't go anywhere. And Elisha already knows. He already knows. So he then strikes Gehazi with Naaman's leprosy that he just took away from Naaman.
Yeah.
And his seed as well.
Yeah, this is just, Elisha doesn't want it to look like the word of God is for sale. Is really the purpose, I think, in that. So
that's good.
All right. That's Monday.
Yep. We got Monday down. Tuesday, we got 6 through 8. So we're in the time where really it's like we're not talking about the lineages of the king. We're kind of aside from that. We're looking just at Elisha and what he did at this point, right?
Yeah, it's like you're showing a timeline, and then you pause for a second, like like some Netflix series where they'll show the timeline of the account, and then the next episode will say 4 years ago, and then they give some back history. So that's pretty much what's going on here. John Phillips says in his book on the Revelation, he does a similar thing. He says, imagine like you're at a parade, and they show the parade walking by, and then all of a sudden they go back and they interview one of the floats. So it's sort of that mentality where now we're stepping back into that time frame, and we're going to give you some accounts within that. And that's what we see here with Elisha.
Yep. So the chapter 6 starts with the passage about the axe head, and we heard a message on this, and I don't want to go into all the thing, but the preacher had the axe head represent God and the guy losing the axe head and stuff like that. It's a pretty cool study, but
just general layer of I think the whole passage really is to show not so much the axe head, but to show Elisha is making an influence.
Yeah.
Because the school of prophets is growing, and they need to expand the building. And then we've got this miracle of the axe head.
The axe head, and the axe head floats and stuff. Yeah. And then Syria. Yeah. We have Syria come into play, and they want war against Israel. And
there's some cool stuff that happens here.
I love these next few verses.
So Ben-Hadad, who is the king of Syria, which is more of a title probably. It was his name, but it's the title. And, the statement there is like he hears what you whisper in your bedchamber. I mean, God is telling him.
Yeah,
what
3
the
times the Israel defeats him, like basically like a hard counter to whatever they did.
Yeah, they knew exactly where they were going to be, what they were going to do. So he gets hacked off, Abinadab does, and he sends an army to take out Elisha. And
So cool.
they get there, and they see around the city a circle of flaming horses, and it doesn't say angels, but pretty much angels on those horses protecting Elisha. And his servant doesn't see it. And he's like, Lord, please open his eyes and let him see this. That's pretty cool.
Yeah.
I told an account of that, of a missionary that had a similar thing that he didn't even see. But when later, after the chief of that village got saved, he had asked him, he says, why didn't you guys attack us that night? Because his family was praying just for their lives. And he says, well, who were those men that were surrounding your home that night? That's the Lord. I mean, it's these angels of the Lord that were there. And he does something really cool here. Go ahead if you want to tell that.
Well, does Elisha always see those angels? Is what I.
Oh, I don't know. I mean, yeah, because he clearly sees them.
The servant did not, and he asked the Lord to then open his eyes. Like his eyes were always open. Yeah.
Does Elisha always look around and see the spirit world as well? I don't know. No.
I mean,
that would be
he
incredible.
knew exactly what the Syrians were doing.
Yeah.
So, something cool.
Yeah.
But yeah, then he asked God to blind all the Syrians, and he leads them right into Samaria.
He's like, yeah, you're in the wrong city. He's over here.
Yeah, and then he asked the Lord to give him their sight back, and they look around and they're surrounded by their enemy.
Yeah, but he doesn't kill them, and he feeds them and sends them back.
Just so contradictory to the culture,
right
there.
Right.
And in Romans 12:20, it's the whole notion of feeding your enemies,
right.
and not. Sorry, go ahead.
No, that's good. But then, it says they don't attack anymore, well, for a while. And eventually they start to do full-scale siege of Samaria. And it's to the point that it says they're eating dung of animals and even boiling their own children.
Because this is where, like, one woman doesn't get... One woman gives up their child, and then the other one doesn't, and then... Yeah.
So the king blames Elisha, and we get into chapter 7. I love this one. This is reads like a short story. Yeah. So Elisha tells the elders, he says, all right, they come to kill him, and he says, no, by tomorrow you're going to have so much food that, that flour is going to be just a pittance. And there's one of the king's lords that scoffs at him, and Elisha says, okay, you're going to see it, but you're not going to taste it.
Yeah.
And so that's what happens. So here's the cool part of this one. I love this account.
Just envision this in your head.
So imagine the wall around Samaria, just a stone wall around there. And outside the wall are these 3 lepers. They're not allowed in the city because
4.
They're lepers, all right?
Yeah.
So, is there 4?
I think there's 4, yeah.
No, it's 3, isn't it?
And there were 4 lepers men.
Oh, my goodness. I've all my life said 4. Yeah, I got to correct it right now. Good grief. Okay,
Sorry.
So they're these lepers. Wow. Okay. So there are these lepers outside the door. You can imagine this. And they're talking to themselves. We're starving. Everyone's starving to death. They're like, if we go in... they won't let us go in. So if we go to the enemy who's around there, the Syrian army, if we go to them, they might take us and give us some food. If they don't, they might kill us, but we're going to die here anyway. So let's go. So
might as well.
Yeah. So they go, and apparently the Lord makes the Syrian army hear the sound of another army coming, and it spooks them to such a degree that they leave everything. They don't take their tents. They don't even take their animals. And they run for their life. In fact, later on we're going to see as the king of Israel sends people to see him, they're like, there's vessels and clothes that they've, to free themselves. It's almost like the sound of the enemy took them all the way back to where they were coming from.
Yeah.
So these lepers get there, and there's nobody.
It's 4 dudes walking in a ghost town.
So they go into the tents, they're gorging themselves, they're taking loot and hiding it, and then finally,
one of the guys is like, we might get in trouble here.
hey, Bob, you think we should tell everybody else that's starving to death as well? Their conscience sort of gets to them, and they go and tell the king's porter. King doesn't believe it. He thinks it's a trick, like an AI type trick, pull them out of the city and burn the city type thing. So he sends some after him, and sure enough, that's it's happened. He makes that lord that scoffed at it, he's in charge of the gate.
Yeah.
And the people trample him to death.
Yeah, a bunch of hungry people.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So he gets to see it, but he dies. And sure enough, by the end of the day, food's going for pennies on the dollar. So,
it's just 4 dudes walking around.
It's pretty. How did I say 3? I've said 3 all my life with that too. That's
not
funny.
that big of a deal.
It is to me. Just mention, can't miss that kind of detail. 4 leprous men right there.
Chapter 8. So we have the Shunammite woman who Elisha saved in chapter 4. And he tells her to get away because there's going to be a 7-year famine. And so she does. Then she comes back. And we see that the king of Israel then asks Gehazi about the miracles of Elisha.
So what's going on here? How's Gehazi there? He's a leper. So is this one out of order, or is Gehazi just allowed to be there?
I don't know.
I don't either. I think it is in order, personally. I think Gehazi's just allowed to be there. I think the king is so wants to hear of Elisha's doings that he allowed him in his presence. That's my personal. But but him talking, Gehazi sharing this stuff about the Shunammite woman, about how he raised her son from the dead, is just, it's
the Lord.
The Lord's timing there.
Because then she shows up, and then she tells him, and then so the king restores her land to her.
Yeah.
And then we get into Hazael, which is the king of Syria.
Well, not yet.
Well, no,
it will be in a moment.
Sorry. The king of Syria and Hazael. I read my notes wrong. So the king of Syria is sick, and he hears that Elisha is coming his way. So he asks Hazael to go and see if he's going to survive. Kind of like
wrong guy.
Yeah. Kind of like in chapter 1, I think, of where
with Jeroboam and his kid.
Yeah, when he falls down the lattice or whatever, he asks if he's going to survive.
Oh, Ahaziah. Yeah, Ahaziah. Yeah.
And so Hazael asks Elisha, and Elisha tells him to tell the king that he is going to survive, but really he's not going to survive. And
you're going to survive the sickness.
Yeah.
But you're still going to die.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, that makes more sense.
Yeah.
And then in verses 11 through 13 here, Elisha just starts weeping because he knows knows the future of Hazael and how he's going to be a terror in the nation of Israel, and you'll see later on he sieges.
So Hazael lets Ben-Hadad know. You got it? So Hazael lets Ben-Hadad know, you're going to survive this. And then he goes and he takes this cloth full of water and he puts it over Ben-Hadad, who's weak, I guess, from sickness.
A waterboard,
pretty much. And he dies. And he becomes the king from that.
Sieges.
Yeah. He assassinates the king of Syria. So now we've got Hazael as the king of Syria.
Mm-hmm.
We have now stick with us here, because this is where we need to go over. We now have, remember, you've got Judah in the south, you've got Israel in the north, and if you're listening to this on radio, you don't see my hands moving like that, but they start to use the same names for their kings. All right, what is wrong?
On radio?
Oh yeah, on
I'm sorry.
podcast. I'm showing
I'm losing it.
on your 8-track.
Yeah.
I never had an 8-track. That was after me, or before
records.
me. That was before me. I did have records. You had your sister has records. I mean,
We have records. Yeah.
That's never gone away. But
it's coming back.
yeah, I had cassettes. Was what I started with.
Yeah.
You have no idea the headache
the pain
that came
of
with
that,
cassettes.
Because you have
Making a playlist or off of the
Remix.
radio. Yeah, stuff like that. All right, back to it. So let's go through some of this. If you bought the Holman Bible Atlas, I would encourage you this week when you're studying, you need to look at 2 pages. The first one is going to be pages 116 and 117. It gives a list of the kings of Israel and Judah. And then later on in our study today, you're going to get to page 133, which gives the Assyrian kings. Both of these are going to be really important to help you. So if you remember, we had let's just rehash some of where these kings were. In Israel in the north, I told Jake I was going to do this. So in the north, just like in America, you're going to have, it's a little more liberal in the north than it is in the south. South, you're going to have people that follow the Lord. Same thing here. Judah, the southern kingdom, they followed the Lord more. Israel in the north never followed the Lord. And we have here Omri, who has Ahab, marries Jezebel, wicked woman, and they have 2 sons that become king. As Ahaziah, he dies. Then Jehoram, he comes in. That's Ahaziah's brother. Now, he is the one that probably was king during most of this time with Elisha. Then we have in the south, which is what we're going to get to now, we have at the exact same time, there's a king named Jehoram there as well. He is Jehoshaphat's son. And he is going to have a son named Ahaziah.
He marries Athaliah.
Yeah,
too.
we'll get to that in a minute. But so just to keep this, there's some guys with the same names that we have here. So there's a Jehoram in Israel in the north, and now there's a Jehoram in the south. We call him Jehoram-Lee or Jehoram-Bob, like the South they say.
You're a nerd.
Yeah, don't get mad at me if you're from the South. My parents are from the South. My dad is pretty much. So I think that was important to point out though as we go into this.
Yeah, because there's the same names over and over, and
yeah,
a lot of times it says like Joram, the king of Israel. So just make sure you're talking.
See the Israel, see the Judah.
And so in verse 25 we have Ahaziah's.
Well, wait a minute. You got to get to 16 then. So Jehoram, the son of Jehoshaphat, he reigns 8 years. So he's in the southern part. This is Jehoram-Lee, if you want to call him that. And he marries Ahab and Jezebel in the north, their daughter, Athaliah. And he's a wicked man. She's a wicked woman as much as her mom. Then this goes on, and his son, Ahaziah, begins to reign. And he only reigns 1 year. And we'll explain why he only lives 1 year in just a second. But he's raised by this wicked mom. But he allies himself with his uncle, Jehoram, in the north. Or Joram, you'll see it called that as well. And he goes out to battle Hazael in Syria. So Jehoram, the king of Israel, he gets injured in battle, and this is going to be our next thing that we're going to talk about.
Yeah, so Joram gets hurt, or Jehoram of Israel gets hurt, and so Ahaziah at the end of 8 comes to visit him.
Yeah, so he fights Syria, gets hurt, so he goes down to this city called Jezreel, and he's hanging out there.
Yeah.
And we get to chapter 9. Are we still in Tuesday or that's Wednesday?
This is Wednesday now.
Okay.
Which is 9 through 11, and
this is
a jam-packed.
This might be our longest one. We apologize, but if you don't know the roadmap of this one, it can get confusing.
So chapter 9 is jam-packed, and Elisha is going to fill what the Lord called Elijah to do in 1 Kings 19.
That's right.
So he's already anointed Hazael, which was one of the things, and then now he's going to anoint Jehu as the king of Israel.
And who's Jehu?
Jehu is what?
Who is he? Just so that they know who he is.
So Jehu is the general of Joram, right?
Yeah, of the north.
Yeah,
so he's the
north.
general that was going against Assyria. And it says son of Jehoshaphat, blah, 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 blah. It's a different Jehoshaphat, so don't get stuck on that.
So Elisha sends a young man to do this, and he goes, and Jehu is with his men.
Yeah, and they're on the, if you're looking, they're way on the east side, on the other side of the Jordan, is where they had been fighting.
So this young man comes to meet, and he asks Jehu to meet with him privately, and that's where he anoints him, and he tells him what he's he's going to do: destroy the house of Ahab, kill everybody that is from the lineage of Ahab
And Jezebel.
Yeah. And so the young man says that, and then gets out of there.
Yeah.
And so when he comes out, the men are, what's that crazy guy? What did he say to you?
Yeah.
And he first lies, but then they keep insisting, and he says, I'm the king of Israel now. And
they bow to him. Yeah, they accept it right away.
Which then starts Jehu's hunt. And now he's on a mission, and he's riding in his chariot to where...
Jezreel, to where Jehoram was.
Yeah. Jehoram, Ahaziah, and Jezebel are.
No, yeah, you're right. Yeah, she is there. You're right. Yeah.
So all three of them are there. And...
now, yeah, so you've got the king of the north, the king of the south, and the wicked witch of the west.
And so now he's in a chariot riding, and there's a watchman that says, hey, there's somebody coming. And so Ahaziah and Jehoram, they say, go and see what he's about. And so they send 2 watchmen out there, and Jehu says, what hast thou to do with peace? And
just get behind me. Yeah.
Get behind me, and they don't come back. So then another watchman is like, oh, it looks like Jehu. So Jehoram and Ahaziah come out to meet Jehu out in the field or whatever, and
I think they had a feel that, hey, something's up here, but let's go check this out.
Yeah. Do you think it was like a peaceful thing? Like,
I can't tell. Based on his reaction...
Why would they go out there if it wasn't?
Based on his reaction, it looks like no. Because he's like, uh-oh, we're in trouble here. It's a trap. And...
Because he must have been a bad dude, because in the next chapters, you see that he was kind of ruthless.
So he realizes, hey, this is a trap, and... he turns his chariot around, tells Ahaziah to run off, and it sounds like he stretched that bow as far as he possibly could, and it enters through his back and Jehoram's back and comes out his heart through the front of his chest. And he slumps down, and they take his body and they take it to Naboth's vineyard, fulfilling the scripture, and they let his blood and his body just be left there in that, which is... fulfillment of that.
So he knew that it wasn't. He knew that it was a trap, because Jehu. They ask him, "Does he come in peace?" And he says, "As long as your mom is alive with her wickedness, there won't be any peace."
Yeah. So then, 27-29, King Ahaziah. So the king of the north's dead. Now the king of the south of Judah, he's also killed
in Megiddo,
and they take him back to Jerusalem. And then verses 30 through 37. These are great. Wicked Queen Jezebel, she hears Jehu coming, she dolls herself up, or puts, and verse 31, she reminds him, some things, Zimri's luck after he killed his king is, he's the guy who set himself on his house on fire, and he got, this didn't go well for him, and who's with me? Send her down. And they throw her out the window. And you can just see this in your mind, because it says blood was on the rocks so she's just bouncing on the way down, and he just tramples her with the horse, and to where she's just gross.
Yeah.
Goes in to the castle, makes himself home, says, hey, go bury her. And the only thing left is her skull the palms of her hands and her feet, and fulfilling 1 Kings 21:23. That's what was going to happen to her.
The dogs would eat her body.
Yeah. So that's a great chapter.
Yeah.
We get to chapter 10 now, and we see
Jehu's rampage.
Yeah, he's fulfilling what God asked him to do. Ahab's family is now wiped out. By Ahab, I mean all of his descendants. That's what we mean by this. So he's in Jezreel. So Samaria is the capital of the northern kingdom, but he's in Jezreel. So he sends over to Samaria some letters to all the elders that were caring for his family, and he basically says, your king's dead. You might as well make them king instead. Sort of seeing if they'll do it. And they're like, no, we're with you. And he goes, well, if you're with me, then go kill the 70 sons of Ahab's descendants and send me their heads. He goes and kills. They do that and bring those heads to him in a basket, which, whatever. He goes and kills 42 princes of Judah that were loyal to Ahaziah. So he's wiping out anyone. And then if you get into verse 15 and 16, you're going to go, they introduce a guy named Jehonadab. And we're supposed to know who he is. It's very interesting. He's not mentioned anywhere else except for the book of Jeremiah. And we find out he's a leader of this group called the Rehabites. So if you're reading this and you're like, who's this guy? Yeah, well, he's not mentioned anywhere else until you get to Jeremiah.
Yeah.
They were this group of nomadic, real austere life. They lived in the desert. They protested materialism and the compromise. So they were with Jehu. They were against Ahab's family as well.
And they make a pact, basically.
Yeah.
Right. And then you see Jehu deceive the Baal worshippers here.
Yeah, this is great.
He's in verse 18. He says, "Ahab served Baal a little, but I will serve him a lot." So they think he's on their side.
Yep.
And he tricked them into coming to make a sacrifice in this room, and he gives them vestments, so basically putting a target on their backs. But they think that it's a gift and everything. And then while they're doing it, or after they do it, he has 80 men go in and
just wipe them out,
kill them all.
And he extinguishes Baal worship in Israel at that point.
Yeah.
Now they still follow Jeroboam's the way Jeroboam had the wickedness of with the calves, the golden calves things, but they no longer Baal worship. There was this mixed, weird religion that they were doing.
It
instead.
says that he still made Israel to sin, but Baal wasn't the.
Yeah. Verse 28: Jehu destroyed Baal out of Israel, but he still followed Jeroboam's, and because of what he did, God tells him that 4 generations after him would remain king, and God fulfills his promise there.
Yeah.
So God starts to use, it tells us in verses 32 and 33 that God now starts to use Syria to shrink the size of Israel. And they start to see losses. Most of the losses at the beginning are on the east side of Jordan, where the 2.5 tribes are over there, Gad, Reuben, and half Manasseh. So Jehu reigns for 28 years in the northern kingdom. And then we get to chapter 11.
Which is back to Judah. We're back to Judah. So we were in Israel, now we're into Judah. And
so we just told you that the northern king had been killed, Jehoram, and Jehu's in his place. Well, Jehu also kills the nephew, Ahaziah, the king of the south. And so Athaliah, his mom,
daughter of Ahab,
she takes her son's death as an opportunity to seize the throne of Judah. She's not even from there. I mean, she was from the north, but she takes it, and she kills all of her grandsons. But Ahaziah's sister, a lady named Jehosheba. I think I like the way you said it better. Jehosheba. I don't know. Yeah. She steals away her nephew named Joash. He's a baby. Apparently he's like 1 or less. And she hides him in the temple. We're going to find out when we go back through this in Chronicles, 2 Chronicles 22, that she was married to Jehoiada, who was the priest at that time. And so, just to boil this down, 6 years goes by, and Athaliah is queen. And she's doing wickedness. She's probably doing Baal worship, all this kind of thing. I think of like Lion King here, like she's Scar, that kind of thing. And then all of a sudden, Simba, he comes back, that kind of thing. So Jehoiada, he lets all the captain of the guard know. In the temple, this 7-year-old boy is there, and they crown him king.
Well, he comes up with a plan where he walks in the middle of 20 guards.
Yeah.
And they walk. I can just imagine this 7-year-old kid.
Yeah, so
being protected.
Cruella de Vil walks in there and she yells, "Treason, treason!" And Jehoiada says he's pretty much in charge right now. Joash is king, but he's a 7-year-old. Take her out and kill her, and now we really have the lineage of Ahab killed off.
Yep.
And Jehoiada influenced the king and the people to follow God at this point. He clears out all the Baal worship and all the Baal priests, and that's the end of that chapter. That's an impactful chapter.
Yeah.
She's the only queen that ever ruled in either of the kingdoms. So that's interesting.
Yeah. So now we're into Thursday, and some more fun stuff.
Yep.
We're not done yet. This week is crazy. So we have chapters 12 through 14 for Thursday, and Joash here, with the help of Jehoiada, you see that Joash lived his entire life in the eyes of the Lord, which I think is because...
As long as Jehoiada was alive.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because his father figure was basically Jehoiada, the priest. So,
we're going to find out later in the 2 Chronicles that when Jehoiada dies, so does Joash's faith, unfortunately. But
gotcha.
What we read here,
wherein Jehoiada the priest instructed. Okay.
Yeah, so Joash is he reigns for 40 years. He starts reigning at 47, at the age of 7. So you'll also note that he is sometimes called Jehoash. That's the same guy. All right, so don't get upset about that or confused about that.
So, correct me if I'm wrong here, but he pretty much instructs all the money to be donated to the temple, right? And to
be repaired.
To repair the temple. And Jehoiada makes a tithe basket.
Yeah, there's a thing that happens here. I think this is why we'll talk about this when we get to 2 Chronicles, but I think this is why he loses some of his faith once Jehoiada dies, because he says, Athaliah's been doing nothing, so the temple's declining, and he says, I want this repaired. So we have here the temple not being repaired like it was supposed to be. And Jehoiada's, this money's coming in, where's it going? So either they're skimming and using this money for their own salaries, or it's actually happening. And I think this really, it bothers the king. So he eventually has a box made up to where there was no way of skimming that money. It had to go in there. And then they go ahead and they repair the temple. So by his 23rd year, the temple was still in disrepair. So he does this thing, and eventually the temple's repaired. We have there in verses 17 and 18, Hazael of Syria, he had just fought against Gath, and now he heads up to Jerusalem, and Joash takes what treasures he has to pay off Hazael to leave, and he does. And after that, we see he's assassinated, and his son Amaziah reigned in his stead. So Joash, Amaziah is where we have the end of chapter 12.
Yeah. Then we go back to Israel now, where Jehoahaz.
Very similar name, yeah.
He starts 23 years into Joash's reign. And again, he was an evil king, so much that the anger of the Lord came on them in the form of the Syrians oppressing them under the rule of Hazael. And in verse 4, you see they're in disarray here, and Jehoahaz now reaches out to the Lord when everything was rough.
It's really one of the only kings to ever reach out to the Lord in Israel, the northern kingdom of Israel. Because piece by piece, Hazael is just, and his son are just taking apart Israel.
Yeah, and God saves them, but only leaves them 50 horsemen, 10 chariots, and 10,000 soldiers.
Yeah, an entire nation, and they have basically 10,000 troops.
Yeah, and so then Jehoahaz dies, and his son Joash, or Jehoash, reigns in his stead, where he reigns for 16 years.
So now we've got a Joash or Jehoash in the north as well as we did in the south. So don't get confused by that. And
Jehoash does evil in the sight of the Lord. And then
he doesn't stay king for very long.
No, he doesn't.
16 years, but they share 3 verses of what he does.
What he does, yeah. Now we have Elisha. Elisha's dying days. He instructs Jehoash of Israel. Do you want to explain this?
So they're in this state of having nothing, and I mean they're almost completely decimated as a nation, the northern kingdom. So Elisha has King Jehoash come to him, and he does this symbolic thing where he says, open the window and shoot this arrow out, and this symbolizing the defeat of Syria. Then he says, now take the arrows and strike them on the ground. And he strikes them on the ground. The king strikes them on the ground 3 times, and he says, no, you should have done it like 5 or 6 times. He goes, that's how many times you're going to defeat Syria, because you're only going to defeat him 3 times now. And we see this comes about. He's able, at the end of this chapter, he's able to defeat Ben-Hadad and take back some of the land. There's a little interesting story in the middle of that where once Elisha does die, he's buried in his sepulcher. Brent just did a sermon on this a little bit ago. And the Moabites are in the land, and a guy's dead, so they go and throw him in just an empty grave. And it happens to be Elisha's, and when the guy's dead body hits Elisha's bones, he wakes, he comes back to life. And
how freaked out would you be?
Yeah, that's
the guy that threw
weird,
him in there.
But that's just like a little side story. And
so I think it's there because that was his. So Elisha asked Elijah to get double portion of his spirit.
Back in First
Kings.
Well, I think it's chapter 2 of 2 Kings. Yeah.
So Elijah, it does 8. He basically doubles Elijah's miracles, and this was the last miracle. I think that's.
I would agree. Yeah. So there's 8 miracles on Elijah recorded and 16 miracles of Elisha.
This was the 16th.
Yeah. So that's probably why.
And then you got Hazael again. He keeps oppressing Israel, and in verse 23, the Lord was gracious toward them only because of his covenant with Abraham.
Yeah.
He doesn't allow them to be fully wiped out, and then we see Hazael dies and his son starts reigning.
Yeah, who's named Ben-Hadad also. So.
And then you see the Syrians, they get smitten or struck down 3 times.
3 times, right. Yeah. So we find ourselves now in 2 Kings 14, and now we have some changes in kings once again. So we find ourselves in the southern kingdom. We have Amaziah, who is king. Amaziah is the son of Joash, and he reigned for 29 years. He does what's right in the Lord's eyes. He kills the assassins of his dad.
Wait, it says right in the eyes of the Lord, but not like David.
Right, because he left the high places.
Yeah, I just thought that was interesting.
Yeah, you'll see all of the high places, all these little areas where people could still do some pagan worship if they wanted to. So he has a victory real early in his career beating the Edomites, which are south of them. So he gets big, thinking he's big stuff, and he challenges the kings. He challenges Jehoash and Israel to war, and Israel mocks him, but he keeps coming. So Amaziah goes out to battle with him, and he's just whooped. So much so that Israel keeps coming down, doesn't leave the battle, keeps coming down into Jerusalem. And this is early in Amaziah's kingship as well. And he destroys a portion of the wall of Jerusalem, a large portion of it. He goes into the temple and into the palace and robs them and takes hostages. And we'll find out later he releases the hostages in 2nd Chronicles, but nonetheless he takes them. And that's Amaziah's legacy. He's assassinated also, and his son Azariah then reigns in his stead. And he's only like a 16-year-old kid at the time.
I just like the trash talk between Amaziah and
That's great
Jehoash.
trash talk on that. Yeah.
Poetic trash talk.
Yeah, we'll let you read that and get that on your own, but that's fun stuff. Then we shift back to the north. So we now have Jeroboam II. He is Jehoash's son. Jehoash dies, and his son Jeroboam, it just says Jeroboam there, but in most books you're going to read it's Jeroboam II. He reigns a long time.
He did, yeah. It says he did evil in the sight of the Lord, but in political terms, and if you look at what he accomplished as a king, he was a prosperous king.
Yeah. So there's a turning point here. God had given some peace to them. There's several things that go on here. Jonah's mentioned, the prophet Jonah, before he prophesied up in Nineveh. He prophesied in Israel. Jeroboam is most likely, if you go back to 2 Kings 13, verses 4 and 5, it mentions a savior, lowercase s, and this is probably Jeroboam that it's talking about. His reign is marked with great prosperity because, as verse 26 says, the Lord saw the affliction of Israel, and he would not blot out the name of Israel, verse 27 says. We're not told here what happens, but geopolitically what's going on is in Syria had been attacking. Well, just to the east of them, the Assyrians are starting to gain power, and they start attacking Syria. So Syria does not have time to attack them. And so there's this relief for a time, and they start to grow. So it gives Israel this time to become prosperous. But as we'll see, Israel misused this time of prosperity. They take it to themselves. We'll see later on. We're going to see as we go through these different books, Hosea and Amos are living during this time, and they both are sent to warn them, and they don't do anything about it. Jeremiah talks during this time as well. And by the time Jeroboam dies, really Israel's cooked. I mean, and they're primed for a takeover because now they're prosperous, and they're hollow because they just don't follow the Lord. So Jeroboam dies, and his son Zechariah comes to power. And he's the 4th generation. He's the one that Jehu was promised 4 generations, and he's the last one.
So now we're into Friday, which is chapters 15 and 17. And for 15, get your notepads out, because
my goodness,
this is the gauntlet here.
This is the one you really need that page for.
Yeah.
In the book.
So this starts with Azariah, or Uzziah, which he's sometimes recognized as, where he reigns for 52 years.
Where's he at?
He's in Judah.
Okay, so we're in the south country.
And he did right in the eyes of the Lord, but he did not take down the high altars again. You'll see that over again. And we don't really get much about his reign here. There's a lot more in the Chronicles, which we won't get into.
Yeah, we'll get to that next time, so we have something to say when we get there.
Yeah, but he was a leper, Now, at first I questioned, like, was he a leper all of his days, or was this kind of like a precursor of how he died?
There's a reason why he's a leper that we'll talk about when we get to Second Chronicles.
Okay.
That happened. So because he was a leper, his son Jotham sort of co-reigns with him during much of his life, and so it says here he judged, but we'll see he also co-reigned with his dad. So
in Second Chronicles 26, I have it here. That's where it gives you the reason.
So Amaziah dies. Azariah, or Uzziah, however you want to, it's written both ways. He is the king in Judah for a very long time.
Yeah, with Jeroboam. So during this time, both of them, in a political sense, were very prosperous.
Yeah.
Both Judah and Israel. And then we get into the
northern
heat of the
kingdom.
gauntlet.
Yeah, most of this is northern kingdom.
Israel's gauntlet. So Zechariah, after Jeroboam dies, Zechariah's son, he comes in to reign for 6 months.
Wow. What happens to him?
He did evil in the sight of the Lord, and
he's assassinated.
Shallum conspires against him.
Yeah.
And that's and then it says
this cracks you up. I don't know why this cracks you up so much.
The humor in the Bible, it doesn't just say a month or like a full month, just so you know.
He got the whole
31
month.
days, yeah.
Yeah, so he reigns for 1 month, and then he's assassinated.
By Menahem.
Yeah.
And this is all during Azariah's, so this is the 39th year of Azariah's reign, because Azariah reigned forever.
So Azariah's in the south, and now you've got Zechariah, Shallum, and Menahem all in the north during this time. Okay?
And Menahem actually reigns for 10 years.
Yeah.
Now. So then we get the impending doom here
yeah.
of the Assyrians.
Assyria is now sort of starting to, they've taken the place of Syria as the big dog on the continent.
Yeah. And Menahem here is trying to find favor in their eyes, and he sends them gifts or whatever so that they don't. There's
a guy named Pul, or it's also Tiglath-Pileser. Pileser, yeah, Pileser, that's right. They're the same guy. Pul, and you're going to read both names here, but it's the same guy. He pays him off. He gives him 1,000. Menahem gives him 1,000 talents of silver to leave, which, he's trying to build an empire. So, yeah, I'll take the money, and you're my servant now, my vassal, and I'll just go fight other places. So that's what he does.
Then we get Pekahiah.
Yeah, so Menahem dies, and his son, Pekahiah, reigns for 2 years. Yeah.
And then in the 52nd year, or the last year of Azariah's reign, you have Pekah, who then kills Pekahiah, and he becomes king and reigns for 20 years.
Yeah, so Pekahiah, the son of Menahem, he is assassinated, and we get this guy, Pekah, who reigns now for 20 years. And Tiglath-Pileser, king of Assyria, he starts just picking them apart now. He starts all the northern part of the country of Israel, some of the west, we'll find out later in Second Chronicles, all of the east is gone. All 2.5 tribes over there. And he starts carrying these people away as captives. And so Pekah then gets assassinated by Hoshea. And so now we've had, how many kings is that?
It's like 5 kings.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And we're on the 6th king now in this period of time.
And Hoshea will end up being the last king of Israel.
Yeah. So
then we head back to Judah.
Yeah, so Azariah dies, and Jotham, his son, reigns now, because he had been co-reigning with his dad, and he reigns for 16 years.
Yeah. And he says that he built the upper gate and helped rebuild the temple and stuff like that.
And he's fighting Syria. Israel and Syria now have combined, and they're fighting against him. And now we get to 2 Kings 16.
So pretty much everyone around Judah is, because they take Phoenicia and Syria. You read that in the Holman.
Yeah.
They pretty much just took over everything.
Yeah, they were the first real empire
Yeah.
that we're going to see that keeps rising from this time. So 2 Kings 16.
We're now in Judah still.
Yeah, Jotham dies. So Azariah, Jotham, and now his son Ahaz, he reigns for 20 years, and he is just evil. He brings Molech worship back, where they're sacrificing children. I read some more about that. We had talked about that. Molech was this giant stone thing where they would heat it up and they would put the child on there, but also to cover the cries and screams of the children, they would beat these drums so you couldn't hear the child. Just so wicked. Micah, the prophet Micah and the prophet Isaiah start to prophesy during this time.
In verse 3, it says he walked in the ways of the northern kingdom.
Oh, yeah.
He did evil like the Israel kings.
So now now we see a bunch of ally ships coming up there. So Israel and Syria, they're aligning themselves with each other, however you want to say it. And then Judah down here, they're vulnerable. So he speaks to Assyria and says, "Hey, help me out, and I'll follow you." And the guy says, "Okay."
Instead of going to God, I think that's the thing.
Oh yeah, without a doubt.
And he sees the political situation and goes with the worldly route of asking the big dog, "Oh, I'll join you," type of thing. He's a coward.
Yeah, and he doesn't follow the Lord.
Yeah.
So then he goes up. He's going up once a year to give tribute, and he's in Damascus, and he looks down and he sees this altar, this pagan altar, and he loves it. And he basically radios back to the priest there, because they had that back there. He says, "I want this altar in the temple." And he moves the brazen altar. He disfigures other pieces of the furnishings in the temple, and he puts this pagan altar in the middle of the temple and begins doing sacrifices.
And it says for the king of Assyria too in verse 18. So
he's completely bought into the religion of Assyria.
He's just selling himself to the Assyrians.
Yeah. So if you're in pagan mindset, this God lowercase g is winning. So why wouldn't we follow him? Is sort of the mentality that's going on there. Then we get to 2 Kings 17, and this is the end of the road for Israel, the northern kingdom. This is it.
Yeah. And this is a long chapter, and Hoshea, he's reigning, and he did evil in the sight of the Lord, just as his fathers did. And Hoshea doesn't pay the tribute tax to Assyria, because I guess he saw that the Egyptian, he thought that the Egyptians could come and save him. So he sends gifts to the Egyptians in hope that they would come and wipe out the Assyrians. But Shalmaneser, who is now the king of Assyria, catches wind of this, and that's the last straw. Yeah. And they come in the 9th year of Hoshea's reign, and they are taken away. The Assyrians take them away, and they are dispersed, just how Deuteronomy 28, 36, and 64 talk about.
Yeah.
Where
God fulfills all of his promises.
Yeah.
Go ahead, finish that up.
And they are dispersed, and they are now part of a different nation.
Isn't that interesting that verse? You can put a dot on 4 and 7, verse 4 and 7. They came out of Egypt as slaves, and now at the very end, that's who they're going back to, asking for help. There's some sad poetic. It's not justice, poeticness to that, but
I also think it's pretty cool. So this was a military strategy of when you conquer a nation, you took them out of the nation. Yeah. And so you'll see that the Assyrians put Babylonians into Israel, and they took the Israelites out and put them in all those cities that it says.
So if you're here, down here in Israel, we're going to take you over here to the other side of the empire, and those there, we're going to move. So you don't know the language, you don't know the area.
Yep.
You don't know anything, so you have to rely on the Assyrians at that point. Yeah,
it's harder to revolt too,
right?
Because you have no idea what's going on.
Right, it's completely brilliant to do that. But they had laid siege around the city of Samaria, but it took them 3 years. So that wall that Omri and Ahab had built around that, it was pretty strong.
Yeah.
Amos verses 2 and 3 speaks about the wall being broken down and how they were going to be humiliated. And sure enough, Shalmaneser's successor, who's Sargon II, there's an inscription that says that from Samaria itself, just the city, he took 27,280 people and 200 chariots and added to his army.
Yeah, I think it's cool how that stuff that, like you just said, it doesn't need validation. The Bible doesn't need validation, but those are the same names that are in the history books that everybody else, like the world, references as history. And it's the same names and the same stuff happening in the Bible.
Right.
So
well, it needs to be, right?
I'm just saying, like, that's a tool.
There's all kinds of archaeological evidence, and you'll hear people, this disproves. No, wait around long enough. Yeah, I mean, they just now, in the last decade, have found things with David's name on it. People were doubting there was a King David. Come on.
Yeah.
I mean, this is, just give people time to find it.
Yeah.
So verses 7 through 23, if you're wondering why all this happened, God spells it out. And he had warned them. They had agreed to follow his plan. He sends more prophets, and they just wouldn't follow God. And verse 22 is interesting. The Lord lays a great deal of the blame on Jeroboam, those calves that he had made.
Mm-hmm.
So we have 19 kings over some 200 years, and the 10 tribes are being removed from the land of Israel. They will never reclaim the land of Israel appropriately. Now, Judah's going to be taken captive in a few chapters by Babylon. They come back exactly to the same spot. We never see the 10 tribes come back exactly like Jeroboam did. Now, they've reclaimed the nation now, but even then, it's just the records are just not like they were. Verse 24 through 41, Assyria repopulates, as you just mentioned. And interesting that the people that were brought in, God sends lions, and they're like, we don't understand the gods, they said gods, of this land. So the Assyrian king sends one priest. To the entire nation, and he doesn't even really tell them.
They were kind of semi-fearing God, but also had all their other gods stuff.
Yeah, this really lines up with the whole Samaritans that we'll see later on. There's some other things that come down the road, but this is so. Yeah, they understand God, they fear God, but at the same time they serve their pagan gods. So it never really happens. It's sort of like if you were to go to, there's several religions. When we went to the Indian reservation, they'll quickly accept God. They'll add God to just their pantheon of other gods. He's one of many versus the true God.
Mm-hmm.
So very interesting.
Now we're into Saturday, chapters 18 and 19, and we got Hezekiah.
Yeah, Hezekiah's a good guy.
And Hezekiah fascinates me. I wrote a book on him. Or not a book. Jeez, please. Why do I keep saying that?
Wow, you wrote a book? That's
awesome. I wrote a paper on him in college, so I just love. And 3 years into Hoshea's reign, so he reigned for 9 years, and 9th year, that's when the exile happened. So 3 years into Hoshea's reign, Hezekiah reigns in Judah now, and he reigns for 29 years. And you see, he's a great king.
Yeah.
And we'll see he makes mistakes, but it is recorded here that there was not a king like him in Judah or Israel before or after.
Before.
Yeah, true.
Isn't that interesting? So that means even David.
Yeah.
That's good company to be in.
Yeah. And it says everything, he did everything like David. Like nobody else has done that. Nobody else has done that. And why? Because he got rid of the high altars, the groves, and he restored worship to God and only God. And in verse 7 it says the Lord was with him and he prospered.
Yeah. He rebels against Assyria control. Now, interesting, just so you know, we no longer will talk about Israel northern king, it's gone.
Yep.
So any king you hear from now on is just a king in Judah.
Yeah.
So the new king, 2 kings after Shalmaneser, is his name. I love this name, Sennacherib.
Sennacherib. Yeah.
That's a cool name.
Yeah. He wanted payment from Judah.
Yeah.
And they didn't give it to him. Hezekiah did not give it to him.
So this is like 8 years after they took Samaria, after they took the northern kingdom. And so 8 years later, now he comes and he surrounds the city of Jerusalem.
Yeah.
He had just taken one of the strongholds of Jerusalem, Lachish, if you say it that way. It's some 30 miles southwest of Jerusalem. So Hezekiah...
This was his first mistake.
Yeah, he takes a bunch of treasures and he sends it to the Assyrian king thinking he'll leave, but it doesn't work.
He goes back to his dad's ways, Ahaz. And sends,
for a moment. I mean, that one thing, yeah.
Yeah.
So Sennacherib sends an envoy with this surrounding army to scare the people. And there's this person, it's a title more than a name, Rabshakeh, sort of like the field commander, that's the name. And he comes, he mocks Hezekiah, he mocks his faith, he mocks God, and I'll let you explain it. You love this part, so go ahead.
So I can just envision like a pompous jerk. That's who I envision with this Rabshakeh guy.
Yeah, this guy's confident for sure.
He's one of the big wigs, and he gives a masterful speech. Like, it's terrible what he says, but the way he says it, he was a great orator. And
this is psychological warfare.
Yeah.
At some of its best, really.
So I want to encourage you to study this yourself, but here are some things to look at here. The fears that he's playing with, because fear is the driving force to make change a lot of the times, especially with revolts and stuff like that.
Well, explain how he does it first.
Well, he comes to by a conduit in where people can hear him.
Yeah, so like the gate of the city, the people are around.
Yeah, and Hezekiah he sends out Eliakim, one of his guys out there, and he starts speaking more toward Eliakim now, but everyone can hear him, and he's talking about how great his army is and how he just conquered Israel, and who serve the same God as Judah, and he's basically saying, so what's stopping us from conquering you with that same God that we just wiped out? Yeah. And he's basically saying, who do you trust? Like, are you trusting this God that didn't save Israel and all that stuff?
This king that believes in him? Yeah.
Yeah. In midway, Eliakim asked him to stop speaking in Hebrew, and because Eliakim knew Assyrian, so he just wanted to have like a conversation between those two. But this Rabshakeh guy is like, no, I want everybody to hear this. And then he keeps going on about how great they are, and he's playing on the fears of the people. And he starts, do you trust in Hezekiah? He just took away all your altars and all these groves. He's not doing what you want him to do. And then he insults the Lord, which is, we'll see, is the ultimate reason why.
Yeah, he's defeated.
Why they're defeated
later.
And they said, we've surrounded you. Who we are a great nation. We'll give you all this stuff. Hezekiah is not promising you anything. He's actually taking away stuff. Yeah. So
it is masterful. The whole language thing where he's trying to erode the trust in the king, but the king ahead of time said, don't respond. And so that they don't. Fortunately, they don't do that.
Yeah, you can see kind of the trust that they had in Hezekiah, even though this guy's just staring him down. Yeah. He must have been a smart dude.
Oh, yeah. Well, I mean, that's how do you get to that high position in an empire if you're not? So
there's a lot there.
Take the time, read through that.
It's cool.
So 2 Kings 19, after hearing this, the king hearing this, he calls on the Lord, and he sends for the prophet Isaiah. So when we go back later, we're going to get into the book of Isaiah. You're going to hear a lot of this. It's sort of like looking at it from different vantage points. You know, you tell the story, I tell the story, Isaiah tells the story. So it's sort of that kind of feel. And
These chapters are almost identical in Isaiah.
Oh, Isaiah. I exactly in Isaiah, yeah. So God makes a promise that Sennacherib will leave after hearing a rumor and that he will die in his own land. That's the promise God makes to Hezekiah.
But notice that Hezekiah immediately goes to the Lord.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
So sure enough, verse 18, he hears a rumor of Ethiopia attacking, and but he sends a note. He says, Hezekiah, don't get cocky. Don't think that we're not going to come back and destroy you. And he mocks God once again. So he gets this letter saying that, and Hezekiah goes into the temple. He lays the letter out in front of the Lord, and he just prays that God would defend them. And the Lord sends Isaiah once again, letting him know that he heard the prayer.
And then he gives Hezekiah his response to
that's
give
great.
to Sennacherib.
That is great.
And he, all that stuff, that great speech that Rabshakeh had and all that, it pales in comparison to what God says there.
Verse 28. He basically tells Rabshakeh here, because thy rage against me and thy tumult is come up into mine ears, therefore I will put my hook in thy nose and my bridle in thy lips, and I will turn thee back by the way by which thou camest. That's awesome.
I can take you wherever you want.
God is just laying it out there. Then there's something interesting also in verses 29 through 31 there. Because they were under siege, they weren't able to plant. They weren't able to sow that year. So God assures them, don't worry. You're going to have enough food. I'm going to take care of you. And I'm going to defend you. And then in verse 34 through 37, just as quickly and as precisely as it can say, the promise is fulfilled. And God doesn't send an army. He just sends himself, the angel of the Lord, which is probably Jesus himself, or it is an angel. It says that night God sent through the Assyrian army 185,000 of them were killed.
And they woke up and all they saw were dead bodies
everywhere. 185,000 people in one spot. How many were around the city? That's amazing.
Yeah.
And
well, I think that plays into the speech too.
Yeah.
Like you see all these, like, holy cow.
So Sennacherib heads back to Assyria, and 2 of his sons assassinate him while he's in his pagan temple.
Which fulfills the prophecy that Isaiah.
Yep. The whole prophecy is fulfilled.
Yep.
So Hezekiah 20. Hezekiah 20. 2 Kings 20. Hezekiah's sickness.
Yeah. So I believe that this chapter came before 18. I think this is
18. Yeah, I do too.
I think that.
Yeah, I do too.
These are not in order because
I think once again this is a timeline, and then here's a snapshot of something that happened during that time. Yeah. I agree.
So,
this is a famous chapter.
Yeah. So he was borderline getting arrogant because, like, he's at 14 years now, right? Yeah, he's at 14 years. And
how many years does he reign?
29, and it says that he'll give him 15 more years.
Yeah,
so he's at 14 years here, and I just imagine him getting. He's being prosperous and stuff, and he sees all this treasure, and he's stricken with a bad illness, and
he's gonna die. Yeah.
And Isaiah comes in and says, "Get your house in order, because you're gonna die." But Hezekiah cries out to the Lord and asks him to heal him. And before Isaiah even leaves, he's in the middle court. He turns him back around and says, "I'll give you 15 more years." And he also says that he will deliver them out of the hands of the Assyrians.
Right.
So I think that's why.
Yeah,
it's
I do too.
before
I do
18.
too. Isaiah 38 and 39 would lend to that as well. Yeah.
So then Hezekiah asked for a sign.
Even though getting well wasn't a good enough sign, he needed a visual sign as well.
Yeah. And so he asked God to
he asked for a sign. Yeah.
Ask for a sign, and
so Isaiah comes up with the
setting the dial back.
Yeah, I'll set the sundial to move either 10 degrees forward or 10 degrees back. Well, the sun's going to keep moving, so it's always going to move forward. So he says, how about 10 degrees back?
Yeah.
And so basically the sun was going to move backwards, or the rotation of the earth, or whatever it might be. And, a true miracle.
Yeah. And then
we don't know how many degrees their sundial was on. If it was like ours, 360, that would be about 40 minutes. But this is before that kind of science, so who knows what it was. Then somebody out there wanted to know that. I wanted to know that.
Then we have the Babylonians come into play for the first time.
Yeah.
And they sent envoys because they heard Hezekiah was sick.
Did they?
It says that.
I know, but is that why they really came?
Oh, yeah.
Would you come 1,500 miles or whatever?
Because they're out there.
It's way over there. Would you just because some random king of some little nation was sick?
Probably not.
Yeah, I don't buy it.
But this is why I thought Hezekiah was getting a little arrogant, because then he shows them everything.
Yeah.
Everything. Isaiah asked him, what did he not show him, or what did he show him, and he said there was nothing that he didn't show them. And
he's bragging.
They will eventually come and take all of it.
Yeah.
And Isaiah tells him that. And Hezekiah dies, but before he dies, you kind of see a little bit of the stuff that he did.
Well, in that he tells them, the Babylonian Empire, who's on the rise, is going to come. Verse 19 is interesting to me in that chapter. His response is just weird. Then said Hezekiah unto Isaiah, good is the word of the Lord which thou hast spoken. He said, is it not good if peace and truth be in my days? It's like, oh, okay. I just caused this problem with the Babylonians, but at least it's not going to happen while I'm alive. That's so weird.
That's why I just don't think he was.
Yeah.
I don't think he was.
It's all, yeah. It's an odd statement. You were going to say something about verse 20?
Yeah, verse 20. You can go and walk through these conduits and these things that allow
you can
water
still. Hezekiah's tunnel is still there,
and that's a lot of historians.
Yeah, you'll see it when we get to Second Chronicles. This is a big deal because if he would not have done this, there was no water supply inside the walls of Jerusalem. So when you're laying siege to a city, you're one thing, you can't get food in and out, but if you don't have water also, you're gonna die quick.
Yeah.
So that's what happens there.
So now we get into chapter 21, where we get to Manasseh.
Yeah, this he's the most wicked king of either kingdom.
Yep. And he said in verse 2 through the 9, you see how wicked he was. Yeah. He brought back altars, the groves. He worshipped Molech,
Baal.
Yeah. It associates him with Ahab.
Verse 9, Manasseh seduced them to do more evil than did the nations whom the Lord destroyed before the children of Israel.
Yeah.
So it's worse now than when they came up out of Egypt and destroyed all those nations.
The Amorites.
He's
the
so wicked. Yeah.
And he puts other altars for other gods in the temple.
Right.
Yeah. And he's using enchantments and stuff like that.
And God says no. In verses 10 through 15, he says, I am bringing such evil upon Jerusalem and Judah that whosoever heareth it, both his ears shall tingle. And he's going to wipe Jerusalem so much, he says, I will wipe Jerusalem as a man wipeth a dish. Utter destruction is coming.
Yeah.
And so 55 years of his reign goes by.
55, which is the longest.
The longest, the most wicked. Yeah. And his son Amon comes to power. He only rules 2 years, and he's assassinated.
Yeah.
And then we get to 2 Kings 22, and finally, for a brief moment, we see the turn.
Yeah. And so 55 years have gone by. Remember,
57 if you count Amon too. Yeah.
Yeah. So just pure wickedness. And then you have Josiah, an 8-year-old kid.
Yeah.
And he reigns for 31 years. And he's associated with David here. And it says that he doesn't go to the left or right. He's always on the Lord. And
I've preached on this chapter several times just because it's miraculous. So imagine 57 years, and then whatever time it took for him to get to age to where this makes sense. He takes money to repair the temple because 57 years of pagan worship's been going on there. And verse 10, Hilkiah the priest, well, some other gentleman,
Shaphan
finds the book of the Lord. He finds the word of God, gives it to the priest, who, verse 10, calls it a book.
A book, yeah.
Not the book, a book. He doesn't apparently even know completely what it is.
Well, yeah.
And then verses 11 through 20, when the king hears the word of God, he's never heard the word of God. Imagine that in your mind. He's never even heard the word of God as the king of Judah, God's chosen people.
Well, it was 49 years of complete wickedness until he was even born.
Right.
Yeah.
And then he humbles his heart because he realizes the great sin that they had done. And then he sends the men to seek the Lord's desire, what they're to do. And this prophetess confirms, yeah, you're going to be destroyed. But in verse 19, due to his humble heart toward God, he promised it's not going to happen during your lifetime.
Because thine heart was tender.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's a lot to be learned there. But the word of God not being in God's people, around God's people for decades upon decades. That's just...
Because I think it's Deuteronomy, it says that the king should read the word themselves and read it to the people.
Yeah, every king was supposed to write out the entire law at the beginning of their reign and to read it to the people, and yet he didn't even know it existed.
Yeah.
That's just mind-boggling.
Yeah.
I put down, interesting to know this was going to happen after you die. So for Joash, interesting to know that when he dies, the people are going to be taken over. So he lived with that the rest of his reign, knowing that was going to happen with his sons and his grandsons. And then next chapter, we're going to see all the stuff he does to undo the wickedness that was going on.
He does read to the people. He starts with reading.
So this is a long one. As you saw, there's tons of kings there that we had to get through.
There's more there, too.
Yeah. So we didn't go through all the details, obviously, because when we get to 1st and 2nd Chronicles, we're going to rehash some of this, and we wanted to have enough meat on the bones to be able to share some additional details.
Yep.
So, hope you're sticking with us. Do somewhat apologize for it being longer, but I don't know how you say this quicker than that. So
no, I feel like I had like 35 pages of notes, 14 font, double space, but still, like, there was a lot there.
All right, take us home.
Did you know that dogs cannot operate our MRI machines?
No.
But cats can.
See, that's just terrible.
It's terrible.
With that, let's leave.
We always end with that.
You guys have a great week. Love you guys.